Hi, Leonard.
Just let me know
Hi,
when you're
everyone.
ready.
Sorry for the delay.
AJ, are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to call the Springfield City Council work session to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Councilors Moe,
Here.
Rodley,
Here.
Stair,
Here.
Woodrow,
Here.
and Pictionary.
Here.
All right. Looks like the first item is the continuation of the interviews for interim council candidates. So Mary Bridget.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Mary Bridget Smith, the City Attorney, presenting this item. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So as Mayor Van Gordon said, we are continuing the interviews for the Ward 1 vacancy. You have 4 interviews scheduled for this evening, and that is Timothy Cantor, Grace Bergen, Damian Pitts, and TJ Allen. The question is the same as the previous week, and the formatting is the same, where one counselor will ask all the questions of the interviewee. AJ and Neil are working sort of the back end of bringing people up. And just a reminder to any meeting attendees, this is a work session only night, so there isn't an opportunity for public comment, but people are certainly welcome to reach out via our website. We'll direct you to some email addresses. Also can drop off comments on Friday when City Hall is open, and provide comment that way. And also an opportunity for public comment at the March 1st meeting. And unless there are any other questions, I can turn it over to you to discuss the logistics for asking questions.
I don't see any questions. So like Mary Bridget said, same format as last week, but I think I think we left off with Leonard. So Mary Lee's going to have the first set of questions when we get ready. So I think we're ready, Mary Bridget, when you're ready.
Okay, that's good. First person is Timothy Cantor, and I'll see if he is online. Hold on.
Hello, Timothy. Can you hear us?
I can. Good evening.
Hello. So we're going to go through the interview questions. Is the formatting goes, one counselor is going to ask all the questions to you and then give you a chance to respond while the rest of us take notes. Do you have any questions before we get started?
No.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Counselor Woodrow to take you through the questions.
Hi,
Thank you.
Timothy.
Hello.
I'm going to go ahead and start with the questions. Number 1, what are the primary reasons for your interest in the Ward 1 City Council position?
So, for me, I think it's the fact that I have lived here for 25 years in Springfield. I've worked for Springfield Schools for 20 years. And the great thing about this town is that I love that it has that kind of small town feeling. I love the fact that Springfield has that feeling of being kind of a small town, but I also love that we have access to a metro area. And so it's the both, you get the best out of both worlds there. And I think bringing people into city council who have different lived experiences is really important. Being a veteran, being homeless at one point, being a renter my entire time here in Springfield. I think those are all things that have kind of led me to this point.
What unique abilities or experiences would you bring to the council?
I think you all probably already do a really good job at this, but bringing people together, I think, is something that I have some good skills in. Part of my job is to bring agencies and community members together in what we call the Springfield Safety Net program. And so I have a lot of experience bringing people in who have kind of varied experiences, different goals, different agendas themselves, to bring them all in together and try to look at an issue and then move forward together.
Thank you. When faced with a complex problem with multiple solutions, what process would you use to select the best solution to the problem?
So in this area, I really like a hybrid. So I first really like getting input from as many people as possible, bringing in different communities, gathering as much information as you can get on a particular issue. But I also really like having a set time agenda and a goal and a timeline that you're working towards. Because one of the issues I've been known to have is that when things drag on and on forever in conversation mode, I tend to get a little impatient because I really like to bring things together in a unified manner and then get to a decision that you can then implement.
Please describe your understanding of the relationship between the city council and staff.
So, well, number one, I think the relationship always needs to be professional and cordial. I think in most cities in Oregon, I know it's a little different on the East Coast, but the way it usually works is that the council and mayor direct policy, and that the council usually only has one or two actual employees, which is usually a city manager and at times a city attorney. And I think it's really important for city councilors to keep in mind that, that's the role, is that you're working with the city manager to then work with department heads, to then work with supervisors, to then work with the line employees. And I know most city managers really like to kind of maintain that structure. I think councilors can get themselves historically in trouble in many places in the United States where they tend to want to go around that process and, and show up and say, I'm on the city council and you must do this. And so I think that just really needs to be avoided and the structure in place politely and respectfully followed.
If there were three things in Springfield you were permitted to do, whether it be to add, eliminate, or change anything, what would those be?
Ooh, well, something kind of close to my heart is low-income housing. I really think Springfield needs to continue to move forward and really get some momentum around low-income housing. I really think bringing people of different cultures, and I use the word culture as the big tent word. So, veterans, people who might be low income, people of different races and ethnicities. I think we have to look at all of that and bring it in together into Springfield. I would love to see more vets get involved in city government. Being, like I said, a veteran myself, it's something that I think veterans have a lot to contribute. And something that I've also been interested in for a number of years now is restorative justice. And I've seen restorative justice go really well, and I've seen restorative justice go really badly. And so one of the things I would do is implement the perfect restorative justice program in Springfield. And then last but not least, and this is really just purely for myself, more bike paths and easier biking routes. I'm a person who does not drive. I rely completely on public transportation or biking. And so I know you're all familiar with the Gateway area, especially up on Gateway. It can be a little scary at times.
There are 6 city council positions. What do you believe are the advantages and disadvantages of collective decision-making and shared leadership?
Well, I think that's how you really make progress in a community, is by bringing people together. So you have to get people involved, and sorry, I lost my train of thought there just
That's
for a
okay.
second. So collective decision-making and shared leadership. I think shared leadership is important because no one person can do it all. There's so many different committees and different groups and different organizations. And there's just no way that, 1 or 2 people can take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. And then finally, I think it builds trust within, the team itself. Is that when you go through the process, you're constantly building trust to the next process and then to the next process. And so I think it really can build trust amongst the team.
Councilors are elected citywide rather than by ward. What advantages or disadvantages do you see with that process?
So, ward-wise, of course, you have a city councilor who's representing that ward, and that's really their job. And so that ward primarily gets all of their attention, which can be a good thing. Citywide, I think it opens up to more of a feeling of responsibility for the entire city. So it's not just that I care about Ward 1, I care about the city of Springfield. To be totally honest, I actually like a hybrid model of where there's a mixture of both ward and citywide positions on a city council. But that's just something that I've personally kind of been into. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Our decision is not scheduled to be made until March 1st, so we will, well, if you tune in March 1st, you'll definitely see where we come out in the end.
So tune in March 1st. I love it.
Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you all.
So Mary Bridget, I think we are ready for Grace.
Great. Next person is Grace Bergen.
Grace, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we welcome. So the game plan is that we're going to have one counselor ask all the questions and take you through it. And then the rest of us will take notes as you respond. So Counselor Piscineri is going to lead you through the questions, and I'll turn it over to him.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. The first one out of the gate is going to be, what are the primary reasons for your interest in the Ward 1 City Council position?
Thank you. Well, I want to be the city councilor from Ward 1 for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, Springfield is home. I grew up here. I've been here my whole life. Over the past 3 decades, I have been privileged to watch Springfield blossom into the city that we are now. I've watched leadership take great strides for the betterment of our citizens. It's not easy always, but it's the right decision often is reached. And I want to be a part of that team. Next, it's no secret that our country is experiencing a great divide. In a time like now, our citizens are looking for leadership that listens and is not here just to check boxes. That inspires and makes informed decisions, and not being placed on here as a learning experience, but someone that already has the applicable experience. I'm not here to build my resume, but rather build our community and have a positive impact so that our kids will, mine and my husband's kids will want to stay here just as I did when they grow up.
Thank you. What unique abilities or experiences would you bring to the city council?
I would say the unique abilities that I bring to the position would be the ability to not only listen, but to hear. And that's really important in our society these days. The ability to collaborate and come to a well-informed decision. My time serving on the Planning Commission has given me the firsthand experience in working with city staff, working within our code, our city goals, and the goals of the state to make the most informed decision. In my work with Oregon Realtors, I have worked with strategic plans, large budgets, talking with legislators to help solve issues that impact communities across the state and our country, including fair housing, housing issues in general. I've held various leadership positions where I've had to put my personal feelings aside to lead an organization into making the right decision, and recognizing that it's not about me as a person, but us as moving the city forward.
Thank you. When faced with a complex problem with multiple solutions, what process would you use to select the best solution to that problem?
Well, the best process to reach any solution is to listen, of course, to all of the evidence and supporting documents provided prior to coming in, rather than coming in with a bias in hand already. And to objectively make the decisions based upon the criteria of approval, planning goals, metro plan goals, etc. Of course, it's always crucial to make decisions that best serve the city. And then if it comes down to, if I'm still uncertain on the best solution, I'm not one to just say yay or nay, being uncertain. I think that it's important to continue to ask questions until you feel confident in the decision that you make, and not just a Waverly decision. So with multiple solutions, I think that if there are multiple solutions, I think there's an opportunity for more questions to be had for a more confident single solution.
Thank you. So please describe your understanding of the relationship between the city council and staff.
In serving on the Planning Commission, I've observed that the work of staff is what makes it even possible to deliberate on an issue and carry out a decision. Staff is the blood that rushes through the veins, through the heart of the city to make it function. I have a deep respect for all the hard work and knowledge that the city staff has on a wide variety of topics. It's really impressive. Without their expertise, City Council, and then in my experience, Planning Commission, as well as other areas within the city, we wouldn't be able to make the informed decisions that we have to, which would leave us exposed on appeals, which obviously none of us want to do. They're such a great resource. They're also really great listeners. But what I also appreciate is that when I've on Planning Commission, when we've had discussion and deliberation, and there have been additional findings that we wanted to include into an approval, conditions of approval, they've been amazing at getting that worked in the way that our vision was. And I think it's absolutely crucial for staff and City Council to have a great working relationship to accomplish great things and not just be one-sided. They definitely are an important part of the team here.
Thank you. So if there were 3 things in Springfield you were permitted to do, whether it be to add, eliminate, or change anything, what would those be?
This I could be talking about this one for a long time. I would say in collaboration with council, I'd like to bring more businesses and restaurants to the Thurston area, as well as Main Street area, and do a little bit more hands-on in the Mohawk, Marcola area. Because, you know, I think we've done really great work in downtown and gateway areas, and we've become well known. within our community and Eugene for those areas. And I think that if we were continued to do that, our citizens deserve that. So that's something that I would focus on. Another thing is when you look at our city map, you see there are a lot of residents that aren't represented because they're within the urban growth boundary, but not within city limits. I know it's probably a long shot, but I would love to see a way for them to be represented, whether that's an additional council member or I'm not sure what that looks like. But I would love, there's a lot of residents out there and there's pockets specifically in the Hayden Bridge area. So that'd be interesting to dive into. And then of course, near and dear to my heart being in the housing industry would be to eliminate obstacles to building houses. I know we've done a great job in the past of waiving the SDC fees that we're able to, that we have control over. But I would like to dig in a little bit deeper to see what is causing people or what is stopping people from building. And I'm not talking about builders, I'm talking about individual people, individual owners that are looking and building, because as we all know, we have a massive housing shortage. And the best way to get to fixing that is building. And I know that the building costs are pretty expensive right now, but that's something that I'd like to look into also.
Thank you. So there are 6 city council positions. What do you believe are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of collective decision-making and shared leadership?
Well, I think that, collaboration and representation of all of our city, the citizens is crucial in making decisions that will benefit the city as a whole. Having counselors from around the city, it's 6 geographical areas being represented. And for people that don't know Springfield, they may not think that our city is big enough for that to be such an impact. But when you look at the different areas, it's really important. And so having those all areas represented and being the shared leadership, it offers the opportunity for a healthy discussion on what might affect one ward of the city differently than a different ward. I think it's important to have those different perspectives on, if we're talking about a development in North Gateway, and we're only having, we don't have a representative in the room that has the hands-on experience as to how that would affect not only other businesses, but neighbors. I think that's important that we have that representation. I also think it's really important, when you have that collective decision-making and shared leadership, it's important that we're using each other as sounding boards. I mean, we all have blind spots, and I think together, that's where great decisions are made, because you might be focused on one specific area, but if someone brings out another point, you're just, oh, I didn't think about that. I'm so glad that I don't have all of the liability of our entire city. So I think that's very crucial.
Thank you. So councilors are elected citywide rather than by ward. What advantages or disadvantages do you see with that process?
I thought about this question a lot. Even though we're divided into wards, at the end of the day, when council is at council chamber, whether that's virtual or someday we'll get back to in-person chambers, we're still one city. So the decisions that each councilor is making is, though we live in different areas of the city, it still is affecting the city at large. And so I think, one of a positive about that is this, because those decisions do affect the city at large and not just the ward specifically, it allows the city to select who's going to be making those decisions for them at large, and collectively, not for one specific area, because there might be someone who is hyper focused on a specific area, but they don't have the larger city goals in mind. And I think that's important to recognize. If I had to take the disadvantage of that, I would say that the entire city might not know who the best person is to represent a specific ward for what their housing looks like, or their business looks like, or the development in the area looks like. Just speaking from my experience specifically, I represent Lane County realtors at the state level. And if we were to select, if the statewide, and which is similar to what we're doing now on the ward side of things, if we were to select who would represent, for example, someone out in Prineville, I wouldn't necessarily know who the best person is to represent. So I could see the other side of that, of having the ward specific elections, because they would know more boots on the ground who is best fit to represent them.
Okay, thank you. Those are all of my questions, and I'm handing you off.
Thank you, Counselor.
Welcome.
Thank you, Grace. We will be deliberating March 1st and then hopefully coming to a decision at that point. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Mary Bridget.
Okay, next is Damian Pitts.
Good evening, Damien.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
So the game plan is one of us is going to be leading you through the questions while the other takes notes, and then we'll go from there. I've got the questions. So could you start off with what are the primary reasons for your interest in the Ward 1 City Council position?
Okay, I think some of the main reasons is that I want to provide a space to elevate the voices of the unheard. I want to plant seeds that will allow future generations to see themselves potentially holding some of these positions. And I want to build a strong community that will, exemplify what Springfield can be. I think there's a lot of potential here, and it can be a lot greater if we stand true to wanting diverse representation.
Perfect. What unique abilities or experiences would you bring to the council?
I think just based on my life experiences, I've developed a very unique worldview that has allowed me to navigate various spaces. I have years of leadership in various environments to include local, national, and international. I have an innovative spirit that can truly benefit the masses, and I have a personality that makes people want to support me and my endeavors. I think since I've lived in Springfield, I haven't been afraid to challenge the status quo. And I think people who know me know that to be true. And even when doing that, there's always a fear of losing something, but I'm not afraid because it's less about me and more about the people. I'm a combat veteran. I'm a sociologist by education, and the way I think is that the team is always greater than self. Last but not least, I'm pretty direct, I'm friendly, and I really like to feed people. So, good and free food, you can't beat that.
All right. When faced with a complex problem with multiple solutions, what processes would you use to select the best solution to the problem?
Okay. I think the first thing that I do is I take a deep breath, and then I determine the end goal. Then I take a step back and do my research. I'm definitely not afraid to ask for help as needed, but I want to make sure that I have some type of guideline before I reach out for help so I can be respectful of other people's time and energy. I think from there, I'll develop primary and alternate, potentially even a tertiary strategy. No matter what strategy I decide to go with, it's going to benefit the greater good.
Please describe your understanding of the relationship between city council and staff.
Okay, so I'm going to use a baking analogy. I think because of the pandemic, all of us have realized that maybe we're pretty good at, navigating the kitchen, or some of us have realized that we probably don't need to own a stove. And so I think a baking analogy is very relatable. I see the city council as being the ingredients, and I see the staff as being the baking soda. For without the staff, there is no rise, from scheduling to documenting to communicating to disseminating. I think these are essential tasks that if they are not supported properly, nothing is going to get done. Also, I think a lot of them live in the area. And so sometimes they're that first voice of citizens that we hear. And I think that's a great thing, because if they feel happy in their position and they feel comfortable being able to provide us with input, then city councilors will be able to do their jobs.
If there were 3 things in Springfield you were permitted to do, whether it be add, eliminate, or change anything, what would those things be?
I think the first thing that I would want to eliminate would be supremacy. And that's not limited to white supremacy, gender supremacy, class supremacy, as well as heteronormative supremacy. If we get rid of that, we can do some big things. Secondly, I would like to provide a living experience that will make our residents our biggest cheerleaders. You know, it's really easy to say what we can bring in, but we got to retain before we can recruit. And so I think in the grand scheme of things, by making our residents our biggest cheerleaders, just a few of the things can include housing, different jobs, various new spaces for gathering, and personal safety. And lastly, let's see. I want to bring businesses to Gateway Mall and Q Street specifically, as well as the Mohawk I cannot speak today. The Mohawk Marketplace, as well as Pioneer Plaza. You know, those are some of the first places that I visit when I moved here, and I've seen a lot of my favorite businesses come and go even before the pandemic hit. And you know, I just think about the things that they brought to those areas, and not only do they bring jobs, but they just bring a greater sense of community. So those are the 3 things.
There are 6 city council positions. What do you believe are the advantages and disadvantages of collective decision-making and shared leadership?
Okay, I think one of the greatest advantages is it creates a checks and balances system so that no person necessarily has more power than the other. And I think the collaboration piece is very, very important to me, because they represent part of the whole, but that part can't operate unless the other pieces are working with them and supporting them. I think one of the biggest disadvantages is that, you know, sometimes just because you're over a ward, your interests might lie elsewhere. You know, some people may focus on the bright and shiny, which may reside in a specific area. And that means that they ignore the dull and the dusty. But the way I see it is sometimes the dull and the dusty, with the right amount of attention, can be just as bright as shiny. And so, yes, that's one advantage and that's one disadvantage.
So councilors are elected city-wide rather than by ward. What advantages or disadvantages do you see with that process?
I think one of the main advantages is we realize that people's interests may alter based on where they work and live. And not everybody is going to live or work in the same area. And they might see things in a specific area that they don't live in that might be very, you know, beneficial to the masses. And I think regardless, everybody's influenced by the changes within the specific wards, and everybody is affected by change and stagnation. And so sometimes it is always really good to have an outside input, or maybe there's a counselor who's dealt with something similar, and then you have that exchange of knowledge, which I think is essential. As far as disadvantages, I mean, the truth of the matter is, you know, some people might look to put somebody that they know that they've supported in the past, they might look to put them in a position of power because they feel that that person is going to benefit their personal gains. You know, sometimes if you don't live or work in the area, you might be affected, but you won't be directly affected, to where, you know, it's kind of one of those things, you know, the NIMBY concept, not in my backyard, or the out of sight, out of mind. And so they might not really feel the outcomes of them putting somebody in that position that might not truly be invested. And I think the worst part of that is that history will continue to repeat itself in a specific area. And that's not always a good thing.
Perfect. We made it to the end of the questions. So that will be it for the evening. Thank you so much. Then we're going to deliberate on March 1st, and then we will make our decision then. Have a great night. Thank Thank you.
too.
Very nice meeting you.
Okay, last person is TJ Allen.
Mayor, this is AJ. I'm just going through the attendees list really quick, and I am having a little bit of difficulty locating Mr. Allen, so if you'll give me just a moment.
We will pause for station identification.
So Mayor, I have a couple of attendees that may be using a phone to call in or maybe anonymous. If permissible, I would like to give TJ an opportunity to raise his hand. I'm not finding him in the list by name. And I just want to make sure before I say that he is not here, that we give him every opportunity to identify himself if he is anonymous or by a phone number.
I'm fine with that.
At this time, I do not see any raised hands. So I am going to say that Mr. Allen has not arrived as an attendee in our meeting.
Okay.
Mayor Van Gordon, we might have some options here, you know, if he's having technical difficulties trying to log on or there's some other circumstance. The council could decide just to move forward and go on to the next item. We could go on to the next item, see if we can get a hold of Mr. Allen while we're having the next item discussion, and could always come back to this interview if he's able to log on a little bit later. Or we could just move forward.
Anybody have a preference? My sense is like maybe we try to call him while we're working on the next item.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, can we go to the next item, and then can somebody in staff try to get a hold of him?
So the next item is the discussion on the potential charter amendment for filling the mayor vacancy. Christina and I are leading that discussion, so I'll text AJ about trying to get a hold of Mr. Allen, and then we can have that discussion in the meantime.
We're ready when you are, Christina.
Mayor, I'll start off if everyone's ready, I'll go ahead and start that.
Okay.
Let me just get rolling here, and then we'll see if we can find Mr. Allen in the meantime.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So good evening again, Mayor and Council. We're here tonight to discuss, I'll get my camera going. A first discussion on a potential charter amendment. This has to do with filling vacancies for mayor and council. I'll be presenting and facilitating the discussion tonight, and then Christina Kraz, the Assistant City Attorney, is also available for additional questions And we thought we would sort of tag team it by, I'll facilitate the discussion. And then if you have particular specific questions or want to talk through hypotheticals, she can be thinking about that while I'm working on the discussion part. And I don't know if she can, like, you know, if we're in the same room, she could elbow me or something if I miss something, but we'll see. We'll see if that works. So, so as I said, this was a discussion on a potential charter amendment for filling vacancies. The issue had come up that some members of the public had brought forward some concerns during the last vacancy, kind of centered on two issues. The issue of whether there should be a charter amendment that would make a time limit on council to make a decision about vacancies, and then whether the charter should be amended to allow for other election opportunities besides just the general biennial election. Sort of the impact of our charter is that in some circumstances, there can be, like, for example, in this last vacancy, the city was without a mayor for a few months. And then the other issue is that the election being for the successor being at the general biennial doesn't happen as often. So then that means the appointed person holds the office for some time and then could be viewed as an incumbent when they are running. And some folks just brought forward some concerns about that. And so here we are tonight to look at that. In the packet, what we did was set forward some options for the council to consider. Framing this as this would probably be a first discussion based on your feedback and questions. Divided the issue into two parts. One, looking at the time limit issue. If the council wanted to look at a charter amendment about having a time limit in which they need to make choices for filling vacancies. And we listed out some communities here that have some time limits. Part of our direction from the council was to look at other communities. So we reached out to our counterparts around the state, got some information, consulted with the League of Oregon Cities, and then also some members of the public who had brought this issue forward. So just trying to bring you kind of a cross-section of some options. So looking at the time limit issue, you know, there are some communities that do have time limits anywhere from 30 to 90 days is what we were finding. One had one that was 60. Doesn't seem like there's anything magic with the time limit. One note we had is that Bend has 30 days in their charter for filling a vacancy. And when we were consulting with them, they did say they had some direction from their council to look at making that a longer period of time, that it was challenging to fill a vacancy in 30 days. But they would have to do a charter amendment and they haven't moved that process forward. So just food for thought on the time limit issue. And then the next issue is sort of I guess I would say the meatier issue, which would be the election. You know, when does the election occur? So I thought what I could do is either we could open it up for questions or I could sort of walk through the different options, however the council would like the information.
Marilee?
I'm not sure. I see the two different parts. I'm not sure. I think I was disappointed that there were only a few examples. I thought,
Okay.
yeah, we're talking about a big state. We've only got a few examples. Were there more cities that had specified how they would create replacements, or how did we end up with just this certain number?
Sure. So what we did was we reached out to our counterparts, some who responded who had just dealt with this issue and filling vacancies. We also consulted with the League of Oregon City. They have some reference cities on their website, and we spoke with them. And then we included Eugene because that was some information that a community member had brought forward as an example. And Bend and Eugene are a little different than other charters. So we thought that would be a good example to see. And then the model charter, so you can get an idea of how the model charter approaches it. That's the charter that's put out by the League of Oregon Cities. It's really meant to be a template for communities as a starting point to look at a charter. And then they can always change it depending on what works for that particular community. So we can definitely get more information. I can tell you we didn't look at every city. We just tried to get a cross section of different options, and we can definitely get you more information.
I'm not sure where the discussion or conversation carries forward. I guess I'm kind of confused. I think because what we just went through was such a unique situation, that even if you threw a time limit in there, we almost met it anyway. Because until we had indication from Mayor Lundberg that she was not going to take her seat for the 4-year that she was just elected to, our hands were tied anyway. So time limit wise, we really were within the realm of time, even some of the time limits we're talking about. As soon as we could act on that, we did. So that, in that particular sense, like I said, I guess I'm at a point of confusion. The other thing that concerns me, and maybe this can come up in the discussion, is that if we're looking for a general consensus on the part of the community, I think we need to look at a general election and not a May election or not a special election, because if we look at the statistics on the number of voters in those smaller elections, they're not representative of the amount of voters we get in the general election. And if we're truly looking at this for that reason, I think that needs to be a point of discussion. So that's, like I said, I'm not exactly sure where you were headed with the discussion, but that's what I would like to see some of the discussion be around.
Okay, so it sounds like you're talking about the idea that in a general election, there are more voters. So that would lead to a more, quote, democratic, I suppose, process. And also, recognizing we really had a unique situation with former Mayor Lundberg's resignation. And then I think with more examples, we could look at also, maybe we just don't, obviously dump 50 charters on you for all the communities, but do some analysis in terms of like, okay, this is kind of what we're seeing in terms of what communities do and what trends are. Understanding, there may, that I don't know yet what those trends would be, but we could definitely look at that and see if we can get for you some ideas of not just what's out there, but kind of what generally most communities are doing. Does that sound?
Yeah, I was in thinking along the terms of being responsive to what this small group of people have been asking for. They're asking for a democratic process. They're asking for the community to be able to select a councilor, a mayor, or whatever. And if we're truly looking at that being a process to have a goal, to have an end result, then I don't think a special election or a primary election will bring out the voters that a general election does. So that was just, a concern I had in trying to, if nothing else, respond to the concerns that were being voiced.
Okay, understood.
Other questions? Steve, did you have your hand up before Leonard?
I did. I support looking for a change that works, but we were in a unique situation when Christine resigned, and we were faced with the fact that on January 1st, she could walk back in and claim that seat, as far as I know, legally. And anything we did in the meantime would have been a waste of time. An election, anything, would have just been a waste of effort and money until January 1st. And now we can address the situation. And I'm thinking now, whatever we come up with, if that situation were to be repeated again, would it solve it? I don't know.
Right.
But I want to look for a better way to do it. And Councilor Woodrow's suggestion about a major election getting more voters out, that's a pretty good deal, because I know the primaries, people just don't turn out. But I'm willing to work for a solution that satisfies the people, because many people want us to make a change, and I'm for it.
Leonard?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I think that if we pursue the most democratic solution, which would be a special election, that by definition almost is going to delay the process. It's not going to be as fast a process if we include the voters. And personally think that we should be including the voters in this process. And so the cost that was, so that there were some figures being sort of bandied about when we were considering how to do this. Was the cost of, I think it was like $10,000 or something like that, that, what was that?
60.
Oh, it was 60?
60,000.
60,000.
Yeah.
60, thanks, Marilee. So was the 60,000, was that going to be for the, for an election just to resolve the mayoral vacancy? Was it going to be that single issue?
I can provide some clarity for that. So just the state law says that if a city is going to hold an election that's not during the primary or the general election, so that's May and November, that it's essentially needs to pay the costs of the election. So we checked with Lane County Elections to get an idea and inserted in the packet, and it is their estimate, and the going off previous elections for a similar jurisdiction was about $60,000 for if Springfield were to hold its own single election for its issue at a special election time. Recall that there are elections in March and September. So one of the things we found with the charter language that we thought was sort of interesting and something to think about was, I think, bringing up this really good point of like when you have the election. So, you know, obviously, like a good point about the general election, that's in November when everyone's used to having elections. And so turnout is generally higher. May is when this council has, in primaries, often has, has their city council elections, so more notoriety there. But March and September are that special election time. And some of these charters talk about having an election at the next quote election. And so, you know, our recommendation would be is if the council wants to think about that issue about potential costs and timing, to maybe have us look at the idea of, you know, do we look at something like how Eugene or other communities that said, no, it's the May election or it's the general election, just for clarity. So you don't find yourself in a situation where the next election that would work would be that March or September, and then you could be on the hook for those costs.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's a really good point.
Yeah, if we were going to have a special election, say, in a March or a September period already, and then we were going to have this vacancy to settle, then we could, to an extent, piggyback onto that special election with the mayoral vacancy, right?
If the city already had an issue going to a special election, you mean?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, the city could potentially have more than one issue go to a special election. I think the issue is if the city is the only jurisdiction on the special election, it's on the hook for the costs and
Yeah.
can't share with another jurisdiction.
I get it. All right. Well, look, I would like to say that the cost, while it should be a factor, I would say that it probably is subordinate to including the will of the voters on this. So I would like to advocate for some sort of special election during this special election period that we're talking about, or these special election periods, March or September.
Yep.
Corey?
So first of all, I appreciate everybody digging in and having this conversation. And I appreciate what Councilor Woodruff said about the general election. And I think that if we're thinking about timing and depending on a situation, I'm actually interested in it either being May or November, that it's whatever the next election is. I realize that we get a higher turnout in November, but also I think it just depends on where there would be a resignation or a death or whatever would make a person leave a position. That if we're going to lean into how to be as accessible as possible to just keep both of those. And I hear what Councilor Stare is saying about a special election and thinking, I don't know how often that might happen, but I mean, I think if we were, I mean, maybe there's a way to put that in there too, as to whatever the next actual real election is, it's not going to cost us $60,000. So just to kind of build that in so that we have a few things so that it's not as restrictive.
So before we go to Mary Lee, then we'll go to Joe, but Mary Bridget, could you confirm, in the way I understand it is in the off year election of, so like the November 2019, or I'm sorry, 2021 election, if nobody has a ballot measure out, like we would have to foot the cost for that. So it's not just special elections, right? But if they're not planning on running an election because there's no issues in, say, November 2021, would we have to pay for that?
You know, let me confirm that. The way the statute's written, it just says, if a city holds an election that's not at the primary or the general, they're responsible for the cost. But it sounds like you're asking if nobody has anything going in a November election, in a general election, and we do, are we still, we're responsible for the cost?
Yes,
And
because
you might know, go ahead, jump in if you know.
I pulled up some of the statutes to prepare for this meeting. So the state law does define the general election as the even numbered year only. You still, if you're holding an election, there are only 4 allowed election dates in a year. So that November date is still an election date in odd numbered years, but it is not the general election. So it's not,
so
it would not be one of those ones that we can piggyback off the county's costs. I think it would fall under that special election.
So really what we're talking about, and I just want to make sure we're because we've got like 4 different Mays and 2 different Novembers going along, is that even yeared election, council's normally elected in the May ballot. And then if we need to have a runoff, we use the November ballot. So there's a primary May even yeared election that we wouldn't have to pay for, and a November even yeared election. And like when I hear people sort of talking about general election, what I'm really hearing is people talking about the elections that would normally occur on an even numbered year. And I'm kind of looking for head nods and so when I hear people talking about turnout, I mean, I hear people talking about turnout specifically being higher on the even numbered years. Okay. Marilee?
Yeah, I would like to back up one more step. The last time we took a charter amendment out to the public was the consideration of the possibility of stipends for council. And before we even did that, we went out to the public and had a poll done to find out if the public was even interested in having that come to them in an election. I would like to back up and think that might be a good idea with this, is to have a formal poll done community-wide to figure out if they are out there interested in a charter amendment. It might save us some money in the long run to get an assessment of where the community sits on that, to do a poll. I guess my biggest concern is that I feel like we're not necessarily getting a representation from all the community that this is what they want us to pursue. And I really try to be responsive to that. So I'm thinking maybe to back up one time, like we did with going out for the other amendment, to see if it's even something that the community would like us to put out there for a vote to have a charter amendment election done.
Joe, and then Steve.
Thank you. So my thoughts is repetitive of what I've heard already, is that I think that the general election, even your general election with the May primary, makes a lot of sense. We have the greatest number of responses from the public. And frankly, our system, in my humble opinion, is I don't see this as something that's broke. And I don't see a great need to try to fix something that really isn't that broke. I am amicable though to looking at it, and frankly, I feel more responsible to the public than I do to some individuals, even some 1 or 2 people or 3 people on the council. I think we have a responsibility to go to the public and say, what do you want us to do in this on this matter? The public still has the ability to submit a referendum. If they're strong about it, then they need to get out and submit a referendum and put it to a vote, put it on the ballot. But I don't think we need to do that. That's an awful lot of work and even some expense for the citizens. And I really hadn't thought about what Marilee just said is, let's do a poll and find out what the general public would like to do. and if there's an interest in it. But frankly, at where we're at now, I think that as other folks have said, to have this repeat of the blue moon is pretty rare, and I don't think it was going to occur in our lifetimes again. Just think of the odds of that, and just think of the possibilities of that. I think how we responded to that blue moon effect, I think we did a great job. The city didn't sink, the projects got done, business carried on, and I'm not interested at all in some sort of special election when, frankly, that's almost a full FTE position that we could potentially lose because we want to do a special election. We're talking 60 grand. That is at some positions, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a full-time employee wage for the year. So, and as lean as we're going to be this next year or two, and financially, I don't want to put that at risk, lose a staff member because of a special election. So I think that it would be wise for us to go out, find out what the public wants to do. That's fine. A poll is, yes, it costs money, but not nearly as much as a special election. And we have a system in place that has worked for many, many years, and just move forward with that and listen to what the public has to say. These other cities, their other policies are very close to that anyway. They all go to election, and that's fine. But I think that, if a position or somebody leaves a position less than halfway through their position, then it's an appointment, and it goes to election, the following election. So I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, Leonard, I'm sorry, I had Steve first.
Okay. I don't whether I should bring this up or not, but I will because I'm a counselor and I need to be responsive to the people. We're going to have an election for charter amendment. We're talking about mayor and councilor now. Are there other things in the charter that we need to address that we can do at the same time? So just wanted to bring that up.
Perfect. Leonard, before you dive in, I got a couple more questions here. So I see the time limit, right? And Mary Bridget, so if we had a situation with Christine's vacancy again, the way I would read any of these proposed charter amendments is it wouldn't have changed the final outcome. The final outcome is we would have just simply had to make a decision in the fall and then make a decision in the beginning of the year. We wouldn't have been able to make one decision, right?
Yeah, I think so. Christina, do you agree? I think you have to deal with each term separately.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. And then I'm going to harken back to when Joe came back from his break on council. We left that position open for, I feel like 90 days because there was an actual live election going on, right? So in the situation, and I'm kind of thinking about these timeframes for an example, we could inadvertently restrict ourselves to having to fill a position while the election for that position is going on, right? So like in Joe's case, where we left it open all summer until November, we might have had to make a choice, right? Because that's what the charter said.
You mean if you had a time limit in the charter, for example,
Correct.
45 days or something? Yeah, I think you probably then would have been required to appoint somebody within that time frame. Yes, I think that's true.
Okay. And then I think the last thing I guess I wanted to point out, because I've looked at is I think the question about how you think about voters and people getting to vote and participation sort of matters. And I think that's a really important question here. The Lane County number in the last primary election was 121,000 total votes cast. In the same election in the off year, it was like 70,000 total votes. So, right, and again, there's not Springfield numbers specific. I just sort of wanted to recognize it is part of the conversation that they're in that off year election. That's a significant drop. And I would assume that if we ran a special election, it would be an even more like a bigger drop because voters aren't used to voting. So that might be something to consider when we think about choices and how many people get to decide these seats. Leonard?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. What would the timetable be on conducting a poll of the public to assess their desire for a special election.
You know, I can check with the city manager's office and see, just to kind of talk timeline in general. If we got on the poll right away to get you some information, we could, you know, thinking about if you wanted to try and get a ballot measure on the upcoming November election, the time to file that is August. So we could try and get the poll done before you go on summer break, and then bring it back, and then get from you, you know, work through the data with you, talk about that. And then if you wanted to, you need to give us direction before you go on summer break about whether you wanted it on the November ballot. So that could be, I can look at that in my direction and then get back to you about time and cost on that, because I think that I haven't worked on a poll before.
If that's what it takes to get us there, I mean, to get this onto the ballot for the November election, then I'm all for it. I think if we ask the question the way that I think it should be asked, I think it's going to be something along the lines of, do you want your opinion to count toward the filling the vacancy? And I think I know what their opinion is going to be, but I would support polling the public to find out what's going on, what their opinion is on this.
Marilee.
I understand what you're saying, but I think we need to specifically ask if they want a charter amendment. That has to be the question of the poll, as to whether they're interested in having a charter amendment in order to have their opinion counted. But it's got to mention charter amendment.
Sure.
So I guess my sense of this is that, you know, I know that there's a lot of information for Mary Bridget to sort of, you know, mull through and gather. My sense is we probably should work towards the May 2022 election. That's actually, if we're like, that would mean we got a ton of time to research it. We can talk about it in the fall, decide if we want to run a poll in the fall, and that would give us sort of, you know, and all the other things we got going on. And I'm kind of looking for some head nods here that, you know, we're going to an election that people are used to voting in. And then we give ourselves, you know, plenty of time to kind of come back, look at the additional information, decide if we want to poll, and go from there. And Pish, did you have something else? And then I'll go back to Leonard. You're still on mute, Pish.
You would think I'd be used to this right now. Anyway, so again, it goes back to a greater response in my book. I think the most input we can possibly call from the public is the way to go. And I think that will not occur in 21 because people are not used to voting in even or odd years. But I do like, in Councillor Moe had injected a little bit in regards to any charter amendments. I think that will give us some time. I think I've got some ideas for some charter amendments that I'd like to see entertained, at least to see if there's enough will behind some of those changes that I have in mind, that we can do it as a package instead of just one item. That would be fiduciarily responsible of us, which we are required to be. And so I have no problem with looking at going to the public and polling for that May 2022 election. So we have the maximum amount of people, maximum amount of response. And I would feel much more comfortable listening from more people, and anything that we can do to get the greater input is, if in my mind, the better. I don't see the harm in doing it in 2022. We're in place now. And I think that it's a great opportunity for us to make some improvements. But I'm also looking at what we have right now. And right now, I think that we have got a good representation of the public and good leadership for the city. So I'm okay with going and looking at it, what the public wants us to do. That's what we're supposed to do. And I think the 2022 election is the most appropriate. And I think we get a greater response in the May election. And plus it'll give us some time to look at other charter amendments, which will require some significant time from our city attorney's office, I'm sure. That's where I'm at.
Leonard.
But before we abandon the idea of putting it on the November ballot, I'd like to just get some sort of a feeling from staff on what the timetable would be for doing the poll. That's where I'm at.
Council, this is Nancy. We're just kind of trying to figure that one out ourselves. It depends on whether or not the vehicle that we would choose for polling mechanism. You can be as formal as going with a PR agency and have a very systematic way to look at it, which might be helpful as far as providing us with clarity around the question that we would want to ask. Or you can be extremely low tech and do something online. But probably I'm getting a reminder from a counselor, sorry. Camera on, Nancy, while you're talking. Probably to be conservative, I would give it a couple weeks to you have to first engage what mechanism you want to use, if you want to go with a formal firm or do something a little bit less extensive, and then develop your questions, your sample size, and then do the actual polling. And sometimes you have to decide, okay, are we going to do, say, a survey size of about like 400 people and have them do phone outreach, or what the mechanism is. So I think what would be best is if staff could come back with some options for the council to consider.
Yeah.
Yes.
You call on me?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So I'm just going to be a little bit messy and just honest and say I'm of a few minds really around this. So I understand that there's this urgency, and I've definitely heard from people that there's this urgency because there was this frustration with the process, how it went, which was partly around timing and partly around who was able to be considered for the mayor position, which we have sort of forgotten about that. So there was frustration around that. Also, I think that we have, and I have been on council for such a short time, so you all can get really crabby at me. It's felt like we've had to be really reactionary for the last month and a half. Because we're trying to do all these things really quickly. And so I would really like us, yes, I would love to do this quickly so that people are happy. And I would like to do it really well so that we don't have to do it again. And to give us an opportunity, we haven't really even sat down and said, as a council, here are the top 5 priorities that we have to really tackle. And where does this fit into that? So that's why I'm saying I'm in a messy place of yes, I want to do for the people. And I think there's a lot of things that we need to do for the people. And a few of them probably take precedent over this. So I don't want to not do this, but I want us to get really realistic and do it well and say, what else? What else are we going to do while we do this? So that was me being sloppy and messy and saying, can we figure out where this fits in the priorities of the big things that need to be solved tomorrow?
Marilee.
Thank you, Corey. I think the best, when you're talking about major changes and you're talking about a charter that's been in place for years and years and decades, I don't think you make changes quickly or overnight. And I think it's important to be deliberate and to process everything. And even though it might seem like it needs to be done quickly, I don't think that I don't think that the right decision or the good decision comes as quickly sometimes as we think it should. And I think being deliberate and taking our time and making sure we get it right is the way to go. So thanks, Corey. It wasn't messy.
Joe?
And actually, I guess what I want to say is Corey articulated what I was trying to say in that sense that she did it well. In a sense that that's really what I'm meaning is I'm a deliberate person. I want to, everything I do, I want to make sure that I do it correctly. And I want to make sure that, you know, we've got a large responsibility to the entire city, and that this is a significant change. And I guess in today's environment, there is this, and she put it well, and Steve, I think, was trying to say it in that sense too, is that there is a sense of urgency. And Leonard, I get what you're saying. And but it's one of those deals where you got to take a deep breath and say, okay, let's walk our way through this and do our small steps through this so we do it right. And we just can't I don't believe we can do it right with that type of urgency. And I'm okay with however it lays out, but in the interim, I want to be able to do it right. And I think we've already heard that we want to hear from as many people as possible. I don't believe anybody would disagree with that. So in that sense, I think the roadmap is laid out before us, and it's just a matter of coming together and saying, okay, well, you know what, we can live with this, and we can move forward. We hear the people. I've heard every one of them every Monday, and I listen to them, and I take everything to heart, and I really do. And so, but I'm also responding. It's like, hey, I've got a responsibility to respond in the correct way and the best way for the city, to be able to allow the staff to present their packages to us in the right way, and for us to be able to be fully informed. And I don't think we could be fully informed unless we do these things in the right steps, in the chronological order. So I guess that's a lot of words for agreeing with what you said, Corey, and Councilor Woodrow, and I think even Mayor Van Gordon. And I do recognize, Leonard, that I get the urgency, and I'm not downplaying that at all. And I totally understand, Steve, with what you're saying. It's the same thing. I'm not downplaying. I just have got a greater sense of responsibility.
Anybody else? So Mary Bridget, do you feel like you've got enough direction here? We were kind of had a long discussion through a lot of different portions of this.
Sure, but I think, let me try and restate it, and then you can let me know if I'm moving in the right direction. So in terms of timing, we can work toward potentially a May 22 election. So that'll impact how we talk to you about process in terms of timing for getting something on the ballot. But in the meantime, you would like to look into polling for the community to have an idea of what the community would think of this type of charter amendment. And then also, I think some data and analysis about what other communities in Oregon are doing, not just a list of what they do, but maybe some analysis about, this many do this many do other things. And then also, it sounds like a key issue is voter turnout. If we're in a situation where there's a vacancy and then there's an election for the successor, that is held at an election, that are wanting to see if we can have it held at an election, or what that means to have it held at an election where there'd be a higher turnout, therefore more people voting. Sounds like that's an important issue as well. Does that sound, did I miss anything?
Leonard?
Well, I think we might be putting the cart a little bit before the horse on the dates. I would like to just have, I think the city manager was talking about being presented with some options on how we were going to do the polling. And I think once we've decided on how we're going to do the polling, the date's probably going to fall into place.
Okay, so find out more information about the polling first, and then that'll help you inform about dates for potential.
Yeah, let's hear from everybody else, but yeah.
Well, she was mentioning May 22. That's May of next year.
I know. I mean,
Okay.
what I'm saying is before we commit to a date, I'd like to hear the options on what the polling are going to be.
Corey?
Yeah.
Hear that, Leonard, and I think that's totally reasonable. In case everything falls into place and we can get it going by November, I'm with you in terms of we don't have to set it far in advance. It's just make sure we take the time to be inclusive and do the stuff. So I hear that, and I think that's reasonable.
Anybody else? Joe?
Yeah, we'll have to get used to raising a hand on this new platform. It works pretty well. It works well to raise your hand, but it doesn't necessarily work that well for a response. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to what you folks are saying at all. I think it makes sense, but I do know that I would be opposed to putting out a poll next week and saying, hey, what do you think about this? When we just talked about, and Councilor Moe just brought up, what other changes can we entertain? And let's put this poll out or just question the public and be smart about how we're exercising, how we're spending these resources to do that. So I think that I have no problem with putting it out as soon as practical, but let's talk about what else should we try to get information from the public. This is a great opportunity for that. And I hate to see it wasted. I'm not wasted, but I hate to see it, the outcome to be so small when we can get a bunch more information. This is, when you do polls, you want to be able to do it in multiple subjects and try to cull as much information as you can. And this is a good opportunity. If we're going to spend the money on a poll, then let's use that money wisely and ask the public multiple choices for different things, different topics.
Marilee?
Yeah, I don't think that there's much of a difference in cost for a poll. Once you're out there for a poll, to ask maybe 7 or 8 questions and, would you be interested in a change in the charter amendment for such and such? Or would you be interested in this charter amendment? And you could go down through a list of 8 or 9 or whatever. But I think that with going along with what Joe's thinking and Steve, that we should look ahead to scheduling a work session for anybody that has questions regarding the charter, and maybe all they want is maybe all they need is clarification. But if not, then is there further discussion that's needed that would take its direction to that poll? So I think a work session on that would be a great start.
So the other thing, and I want to go back to something that Mary Bridget said while we're talking about this November versus May. The November election, if there's nothing else on it, right, that costs us to run it.
Right.
And it's just one of those facts that we want to make sure that on one hand, it could, we could be on the hook for $60K to run it. Joe?
Which goes back to why I think it makes more sense to do it during a general election on an even year, as we discussed earlier, at least I discussed earlier and recommended, because I am definitely not interested in spending that kind of money for an election to hold it earlier on the pretense of just because we can hold it earlier, when theoretically that's darn near a full-time position. So if you want to tell whatever employee may get laid off for that, then you go ahead and do that. But I'm not interested in doing that.
Steve?
Not only do we have the cost of the election, we're going to have the cost of the poll too. Is that 10,000, 15,000? So it's getting more costly. We need to do the poll. We need to do the election, but I want to make sure that we spend our money wisely.
Right.
Okay, so back to you, Mary Bridget, now that we added more direction to this whole.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is get the information on the poll in terms of cost and time frame before you're locked into which election you are considering bringing this forward to, so we can work on that right away. And then it sounds like maybe too, thinking about for that poll, the scope of the poll. And so if there are other potential, this is where I'm gonna make sure I'm clear, potentially other charter amendments that council might be wanting to look at to see if maybe we have a council discussion about that at a work session, or if we get public feedback about something, but ways to bring that forward in case there's something else out there that you may want to do at the same time.
Right.
Okay. Is that okay? All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your discussion. This was really helpful.
All right, looks like we're on to the last item. Do we have an update on our last interview before we?
This is AJ, and we have left text messages and voicemails and have not heard a response. He is still not in the attendees list. So at this point, I don't have any new information for you.
Okay, then we should keep going. So last item is pallet shelter presentation with Aaron Fifield.
Okay, great. Are we doing video? I'm sorry, this was This was new.
Up to you. We've been doing video all day. Some of us can see everybody, some of us can't.
Perfect. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm here tonight to provide info on Lane County's pallet shelter program and give you all an opportunity to share your thoughts on the program, ask any questions. As you know, we're in the middle of a public health crisis. The recommendations for sheltering in place and minimizing our interactions with others can be profoundly difficult for folks experiencing homelessness. To address that, Lane County is partnering with jurisdictions, willing property owners, and local service providers to provide safe and secure places for people to be, while also connecting them to basic services and case management. Currently, they have partnered with properties in Florence, Cottage Grove, Veneta, and Eugene, and they are also looking to Springfield to see if we are interested. The shelters themselves, their pictures in the packet, are sort of simple construction. They're 8x8 or 10x10 panels, durable sort of composite materials that can be assembled in an hour, taken down, moved, connected to electricity if needed. The shelters, like I said, do give someone sort of an individual place to be apart from others. But I'm finding also a key component of Lane County's program is this addition of services and management for each site. Their aim is sort of kind of a conversation with the property owner, sort of placing a small number of these shelters on any given site, and contracting with a dedicated provider to manage the site, to manage the program, to manage clients, ensure that COVID safety protocols are in place, while also developing and developing rules for appropriate behavior, but then also ensuring that those are followed. Such rules such as no alcohol and drugs on site, for example, or certain expectations for rules that need to be followed. Otherwise, someone can no longer sort of be present. But the program is also connecting folks to basic services. So making sure sanitation is on site, but also connecting to food, if there's a referral that needs to be made for medical needs, connecting someone to make sure that they are aware and connected to permanent affordable housing opportunities. The program itself, there would be no cost to the city. Lane County is using federal and state COVID response dollars to buy the pallet shelters and also pay for the management, basic services and case management. The city itself, we, particularly the Community Development Division Director, can approve the use of this on a site in Springfield under the city's current COVID-19 emergency declaration. But staff wanted to first bring this item to council and make sure you all are supportive, I guess, of us doing that. Currently, the city has received a few requests from different property owners in Springfield to be able to offer this program on their site. You'll see in the packet, Mainstream Housing in particular is ready to move forward. They are, if you don't know, are a local affordable housing developer. They're headquartered across from the Justice Center downtown. They serve clients with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And they've recently purchased a 1-acre site on South 42nd Street and have goals to develop permanent affordable housing on that site. In the meantime, before they're able to move forward with that, they'd like to place some pallet shelters on site and sort of ensure that someone is contracted with Lane County and serve the population. Their board is committed to helping to prepare that site, preparing a fence, sort of ensure stormwater needs are met. And you'll see also in the packet, they went ahead and sent a flyer to every property owner and resident connected to their property. I believe that's 47 households. They received 2 responses. You'll see the back and forth in the packet. There were some concerns. They, I think, do a pretty detailed job of addressing those concerns. And I'll say the one line that sort of sticks out for me is that the executive director is sort of trying to make it clear that a managed shelter community, which was what they see their goal here being, is not the same thing as an unmanaged homeless camp. So the latter is not what they're looking for. It's not what they want to do, but they want to create a managed shelter community. So yeah, that's sort of the brief overview. Again, we're looking to I wanted to introduce the program and give you all an opportunity to ask any questions and share your thoughts before we move forward with sort of actually considering a request for approval.
Marilee.
I had a couple questions. Has anybody else besides Main Street Housing have put in a request?
I would say not to the extent that Mainstream does. I don't know if the county, I don't know if the county has received any questions. I received an email of folks wanting, I think in some ways folks are curious what's allowed as opposed to having a vision. They're like, we know we want to, we know there's a need. We have willing property. We'd love to be able to host someone in some sense. Can we do X? And so we did receive one question recently from, I think it's Laurel Hill Center. They have an apartment complex downtown, and they have a large parking lot they say right now is being underutilized. And we're wondering what sort of ability they could have to sort of provide shelter for someone.
What are we looking for as far as supervision is concerned? You mentioned Lane County, but I know is Main Street Housing also looking at Lane County being the oversight of their pallet, or are they?
It's a good question. So Lane County has emphasized that they are not the ones providing, at least in the metro region, they are not the ones providing the oversight. They are contracting with local providers. So that would be sort of like maybe an organization. I think Mainstream has expressed their interest, but it would be a request for proposals. And Lane County has sort of outlined exactly what would be required of someone. And so what I put in your packet is taken from that RFP. So those bullets that you see are the expectations that Lane County has for whoever they would be contracting with.
Now would the contract be with Lane County since they own the pallets?
I think it's with Lane County because they're paying for it. But yes, they do own the pallet shelters and would be loaning those out for use. I think right now this is under the umbrella of COVID. Certainly, I think Lane County is willing and open, depending on the relationship of how this pilot project goes, of what the property owner is willing to consider it longer term. But right now we're sort of looking at it under the COVID umbrella.
Now, the Mainstream Housing is looking at eventually making that property a shelter for residential type for developmentally disabled. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, permanent housing, permanent affordable housing for that population, yes.
So what kind of a transition would there need to be from pallets into the point of where they're ready to develop that property?
It's a great question. That's a great question. And I think that's a little bit, I don't think that's been answered. I think throughout the region, I think right now there is a need that folks are looking to solve. And in some ways are saying, we'll address that other issue later.
I guess, I think the reason my mind is going that way is because I heard this morning in HSC that there was a concern on what to do with someone who doesn't follow the rules. Where can they place that? Where can they place that person in somewhere where they can get help? They don't want to kick them out and just say goodbye. They want to be able to place that person where they can have a positive experience or as much as possible. So they were looking at, they were mentioning the need for mental health services this morning as a result of ending up in those situations. And so I was looking at this in the, trying to get a picture of this whole scenario. But what I'm understanding is that initially with the pallets is just going to be a managed site, not necessarily for developmentally disabled, or are they looking at it as being for developmentally disabled?
I think the county is a little, I think there, because it's federal and state dollars, there are some procurement questions, or not procurement, sorry, but like sort of how clients are chosen. And so the centralized wait list is what the county would be looking for, folks who are identified as literal homeless. I think Mainstream has certainly expressed their preference for, obviously meeting the needs of their population that is currently unhoused, but also knowing that there's a need and priority for unhoused families with children that they would also love to help on site. I think I'm not quite sure exactly what the county's process is for identifying folks. But I hear you. I think that's I hear that question comes up a lot, Councilor Woodrow, in terms of like, what about someone exiting from the emergency room? How do we make sure that they have a good place to be? I think that is something that's a little bit lacking in terms of transitioning where someone is to it. I think the county acknowledges that. I think service providers acknowledge that. I know Mainstream, well, I assume Mainstream would be sort of pretty intentional about what that would look like.
And I think my last question or my last point is that there are deadlines to use the federal money. We have to use federal money by a certain time. And so once we do that, then where are we with these programs? And that also ends up in my transitioning question.
Okay, so a couple thoughts there. The shelters themselves are purchased. So the shelters themselves have been paid for. It's this question about ongoing costs and services. So I don't know exactly the source that the county has received, but based on their estimates, they are thinking they have funding, let's say through December of this calendar year to pay for that. In the case of Mainstream as being an owner, I believe Mainstream is willing to also possibly pay for ongoing services to this population when say the county's funding runs out. I don't know if every property owner would be willing to do that. But in the case of Mainstream, I believe they've expressed their interest in doing that. I think it's an ongoing question, to be honest. I think the way the county sort of Dusk to Dawn or other shelter programs in the region have that same question. It's almost like year-to-year funding to be like, well, can we get this year? How can we pay for it this year?
Right.
It's a good question.
The need is there, and I'm all for trying to help any way we can. I just want to make sure that we make the right steps in the right direction and have the right help finances and help support, management and all that. I would hate to see is getting something set up and then finding out it won't work or we can't do it. I would much rather be deliberate on the front end and make sure that once it gets set up, it's there, rather than having somebody all set to be able to use something and then not finding out that there's a loophole or there's something that we missed. So that's why I was asking all these different questions, is to try to get even more of a full grasp on what all this is. And I think the opportunity to be able to use these pallets, especially for families and children, would be wonderful. I always think back on the number of years, the 10 or 11 years of whatever that I did smart reading, and the number of students I had that were living in their cars with their parents. So, if there's any possible way we could find a way to help them out, that would be awesome. So I've taken up enough time. Go ahead.
Almost didn't go off mute. Okay, so I appreciate all of Councilor Woodrow's questions. I also am interested in a bit of transition, but in a little bit of a different way. One, I'm absolutely for shelter in all the ways that we can get it to folks. And particularly, I'm less concerned about having particularly in this type of emergency housing, all of the services, because I think that the low barrier, the better. But one of my concerns in thinking about this is the latest and the greatest, and we're starting to see these happen. And my concern is if we put so much energy or time into the quick latest and the greatest, and we're not also still making a plan for more substantial housing for people. That's the part that I get concerned about, is like, how do we, if in the transition, how do we make sure that we're looking at how are we going to create stable housing? How are we going to move people from this emergency shelter or COVID shelter or whatever we're calling it into low barrier housing and really long-term tackle, as opposed to short-term. We've got people temporarily housed, but we're not actually solving the housing crisis or moving people into stable housing. So that's the part for me, which is probably bigger than this project. But I just want us to be careful not to get excited about the latest and greatest and say, okay, we'll do this, and we're going to also keep doing these things too.
Joe, did you have your hand up?
I do, and I did.
I did too.
So, Corey, I appreciate what you just said. I kind of think about a cliff edge and saying, well, I'm going to try to look before I do jump. So that's where I'm at. So I've got some questions before. I mean, in general, I'll tell you right now, in general, I think this potentially is a great deal. I like it. I'm not opposed to it right off the bat, but I've got some questions that I feel I need to ask before I can literally say yes. So help me get there. So the first question I have is that they indicate that they're talking about some neighbors had some issues about bathroom, et cetera. And that organization says, oh, we plan on building some permanent bathrooms for this project. Now, if they're building permanent bathrooms, that means they're also putting in sewer lines, which also means that, is that going to be where their houses are built? And does that mean that they're going to be spending all that money on permanent bathrooms when they're going to have residences there that should, I would think, hopefully have their own bathrooms? So it seems like there's, is that really what they're saying, or is it going to be their permanent bathrooms are going to be blue with white caps on the top of them?
So my understanding is this came out of a discussion with the mainstream board. So the board expressed their support for this, but saying they didn't just want a porta potty, they wanted something a little more substantial, thinking that would be better for folks staying there, but also better for the neighbors. In the meantime, before whatever gets built, I think they are saying, well, yes, if it means sooner, let's have a porta potty. Certainly, and we're having this discussion right now, I think they're going to come in for a development issues meeting, a DIM, in the next month or so, or maybe next month, sort of to say, here's our plan for our permanent affordable housing site. What does the sewer sort of structure need to be, and is there a way to tap into it for this temporary use? So to your point, my understanding, permanent affordable housing, yes, the units themselves are going to have bathrooms. The idea isn't to build an out sort of bathroom. I'm not sure how creative they're going to be to provide something better than a porta potty in the meantime, but I think that conversation is they're going to bring their architect to sort of the city planners to say, hey, here's our long-term plan, here's our short-term plan, what makes sense. So they're not. I'll stop.
So I get that, and I also totally understand the neighbors' concerns, because that's very close proximity to their homes, literally feet. So that is something that we should know. At least I feel I should know the answer to that before I can get behind this program, saying, okay, how are we going to make sure that the neighbors are not going to explode over this whole idea? I know there's apprehension, but I want to be able to soften that blow, because I like the program. I think it should work, but we need to have these questions answered, not in juxtapose. Yes.
Sorry, can I confirm what the question is again?
So what truly is their plan? Are they going to build a permanent bathroom so that way it's more feasible and more humanity? I should say less humiliating, or whatever words you want to use. So that way these residents have got a place in which that is respectful of them living there, as opposed to porta potties. Because I don't know about you, but porta potties are not a real great thing. And especially when you're talking in that area and you're talking about going through the summertime, is that, are those going to be closely monitored, closely watched, or in the summertime, are they going to be so disgusting that they're going to be not using them and using them in the neighborhood, using the neighborhood things? That's just a question. I don't expect you to have the answer.
No, I'm actually thinking about how the overnight parking program currently operates. I know those are in residential areas, like
right
of our churches, right? Or, you know, you've got the units are right next to residences.
Right.
And
so that goes back to, well, if you want to lean on that, if you want to lean on that, how many people are in those overnight parking areas compared to this camp? So it's a big difference. So I'm just raising these. I don't necessarily expect you to have answers and full explanations, because I just really don't expect that. But it's something that, that I think needs to be answered in the future, near future. Second is that you mentioned rules, and I totally agree. Someone else, I think, Marilee mentioned those rules. So are they going to be shared with the neighbors so they know what the rules are, and they don't have to guess if whether someone is going to be violating them or not violating rules that don't exist, that they may think is in their head should exist? So that should be majorly communicated with the neighbors, so that starts that you don't have an automatic conflict. Secondly, along with those rules that should be communicated with those neighbors is to who their contact person is, so they can contact that person instead of calling our police department. This is not a place where our police department should be getting involved with, but I can see the neighbors calling them. Hey, they're violating these rules, police. And the police are going to go, well, you know, let's head that off. Okay. Second, it would be you know, I know they sent out 47 letters and it's in the perimeter, and that's our connecting properties. Or are they going to say, okay, well, let's go across the street from this property to literally the neighborhood, as opposed to connected properties? Because you have a person that's living right here next to the property, but they got a neighbor right across the street. They can be just as affected as by them being a neighbor property. So I would like to see that expanded. So it's a ribbon of properties around it as opposed to the border. If that makes sense.
Sure.
And then 3 is that, so is there a hard date? Do they even have a hard date of when they expect to develop that property into permanent residences? And before you answer that, because I know you go through DIM, and so that's going to be, you know, I'm just looking for a projected date. And I know you mentioned December as part of the funding. So I would like to know if that development date or actual shovel in the ground date, where they're going to have to find residences, where Marilee is talking about transition. I'm very concerned about that, because if all of a sudden you have a date coming up and say, yes, you can go ahead and build, how long is it going to take the organization to say, okay, well, we want to build, but we got all these people right here and we don't have a place to put them. So we're going to delay building. And then, which raises my next question. The next question would be, is that if the, you mentioned that there, you know, again, I would like to know what a hard date is, what they truly plan on developing that property, which I think would be a fantastic thing, because developmentally challenged folks, I mean, it's an unserved population that really we need to help, and we need to get some roofs over their heads and get these people some help, and so they can live with a little, you know, they can live. So now we're talking about the funding, which you're talking about runs out in December. You did mention, and you used the word specifically, possibly they will pay. So we don't know. And so if the county's not going to pay, if they may say, no, we're out of funds. And the organization says, we don't have them right now because we want to develop this property. So where's the city at? Are we going to be on the hook all of a sudden because it got built and the money's left, and now we have the bill? There's nothing, or do we kick them out? I mean, I don't know. And I don't want to be in that position. It's like Senate Bill 1145 with state prisoners. They said, we're going to pay the counties to keep the prisoners there for the first year of their incarceration. They paid their rent for the first couple of years, and all of a sudden rent money went out, and now the counties still have to house state prisoners for no money. So that's a problem for me. I'm not saying this is a prison. I'm just saying for the project. So, but do you understand? we need to know these things to see if we're going to literally be on the hook, or are we going to be the bad guy and saying, we're not paying for this and we're going to kick all these people out. I don't want to be in that position. We got enough
Yeah.
problems. We hear from enough people that are upset. So that brings me to, when you said we will figure that out later, really brought me some, with Councillor Woodrow's question in regards to that transition. When you said that they kind of taking the stance of, we will figure this out later, really bothers me. We should have a very clear plan. And if we're in a position where we will figure something out later, then I cannot support this. Let's figure it out now. That's where I'm at.
Okay.
Don't take it personal. Those are just very, I think what you're doing
No,
is,
I
you're doing
have-
amazing. You're
I
doing
have some
amazing.
thoughts, I guess, to some of those points. If there's, yeah, I can certainly share the concerns around porta potties, rules, communication. Then contacting the neighbors, certainly. I think those are, again, like right now the property owner is saying, we're trying this, and Mainstream, I think, recognizes that they would be an example for the city to say, like, we need to make sure this goes well here, to show others that it can go well. So I think they recognize the position that they're in and are willing to sort of be that. I think a couple questions, and I say this, sort of this question about what happens sort of at, I think right now the program is geared around COVID. Ideally, is there a need for sheltering in this way after December? I don't know. Cross our hearts, like, no, hopefully not. So I think that's where the December kind of is trying to align with maybe COVID in that sense. Mainstream has stated they're like 4 or 5 years out from actually developing the site. They just want to make sure how they start with the DIM to make sure they're on point to say, like, if we start to do something now, will it be in line with what we want to do in the future? I think it's an interesting question of what do we do when this program ends? Where do people go? Right now, they don't have a place to go. So what does that mean to give them some place to go for 8 months? And right now, maybe not know where we're going to be in 8 months is kind of, yeah, we don't know where we're going to be in 8 months, but right now people also don't have a place to go. And so I think that is where the willingness to set something up and give us time to sort of figure out what to do in the end, rather than not set something up or wait. But so I think that's where the intent around being okay with the discomfort is, but I understand that not everyone is there, and that's understandable.
Leonard, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Thanks. Aaron, is there a hard dollar figure that the county is in for on this project?
Yeah, I don't actually know what the cost for actually operating each site is. I know they spent close to $1 million in buying the shelters themselves. I think it was 120 shelters they bought, but I don't actually know what the cost for providing services is.
Yeah, and would that would the county's commitment sunset at the end of the year? I mean, I
think their alignment is actually with how much they think they've received and when they think it's going to run out, I think is what the deadline is. I don't think it's so much, they're juggling a few different sources. And so it's hard for them to give me tell me what the rules are. They're like, well, it depends. So I think I think they're estimating to either run out of funds or COVID's no longer a thing at the end of the calendar year.
I think Joe is expressing a really valid concern that we run out of money and then we have to kick everybody out. So I was wondering if it would be possible to take whatever funds we have and allocate them in such a way that we can handle the transition as well. I mean, would it be possible to make it a less ambitious project that would then not sunset and would actually handle the transition for the people that were living there into more permanent housing?
That's a great question. I can certainly throw that to the county. I will say at some point I'll be coming back to you all with a question about additional COVID relief funding that the city has received and not allocated. And we can certainly discuss the need that we still have in this community and where you all would like to place it.
Okay.
Funds, yeah.
The other question I had is Mainstream Housing going to be contracting out the construction and the whatever plumbing and whatever electrical is going to be
Yeah.
needed for this project?
Yeah.
Would they hire locally? Would they be hiring Springfield people?
You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, because I know that it's sort of an ongoing sore spot for our construction companies and for our plumbers and our electricians if it's contracted out outside of town and sometimes outside of the county as well.
Leonard, are you done?
I'm done. Thanks.
Joe?
So I think that's come up before. I think Councilor Mo had his hand up before I did. Did I see that?
Actually, I've been waving it for quite a while here.
Yeah, go. Why don't you let Steve go and I'll
Okay,
wait.
then we're going with Steve.
Okay, it's very simple. We need this. We have a population that needs this housing. I want to satisfy the neighbors around there and I want to build it. I want to do it, figure it out. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Joe?
So, gosh, that kind of threw me through a loop when you said that, Steve. I thought I had an actual, I did have a good question, dang it.
You did.
Oh, no, yes, Leonard, when you're talking about that, I believe in, and I think actually I would like to see Mary B jump in. That's come up before is where I don't believe we're in a position in a driver's seat to be able to recommend and or require any type of how anything is sourced in regards to construction, because then that would put people at a disadvantage and potentially put us in a liable position. So Mary Bridget, I think we've talked about this before, and it probably ought to just go ahead and let that be known so we are all aware of that and it doesn't come up anymore.
Are you asking about whether we can require local sourcing for construction contracts like this?
Yeah, for anything that Springfield has is in the driver's seat on in regards to a project and public funds.
I'm going to see. Go ahead, Christina.
There is a dormant commerce clause, which is the inverse of the commerce clause that the federal government sets the regulations for interstate commerce. The dormant commerce clause is the idea that states are limited in how they can interfere with interstate commerce. So there are limits on the ability to specify by local. I think we would have to do more research on how that would apply specifically in this situation, but that is always something to be aware of.
Thank you, Christina.
All right, anybody else? So I'm hearing a lot of questions, but definitely a yes and.
Okay, I'll circle back with the team and follow up with Councilor Pictionary what some of your concerns there were, but then thinking about broadly, it is a program, and if there are multiple sites, like how do we as a city want to respond to those multiple requests? So.
And I think that's the really big question. And I think Mainstream has got the right sense that how this goes is going to really be decide how what the model looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
Like it's really important that we get this right. We're sort of go slow to go fast here before we talk about it broadly. I think Corey and then Joe.
Just on the heels, because I know we've been chatting about this to what you just said, Sean, I think when we think about that, as opposed to thinking about how many rules and regulations can we put on this, how about how few, so that we're actually setting it up to be successful, as opposed to setting expectations so high, because we can adjust it, see what actually happens, as opposed to making it like putting a lot of barriers on us actually getting it off the ground.
Go.
I want to get it off the ground, and I'm not trying to throw up any barriers. What I'm really trying to do is if it's predictable, it's preventable. And if we want to head off any potential issues and not make this a negative impact and then circle back around and trying to make it non-negative, people are going to remember the bad stuff. I guarantee you that. And so what I'm trying to do is, I like this program, don't get me wrong. What I want to do though is I want to get this going and that we head off potential issues so it is welcomed in the community, in the neighborhood, and we have something that says, hey, see, look, we can make it happen, but we should have this process and do it this way. Otherwise, we don't know what we're going to have. And I frankly don't like jumping off cliffs where I don't know if I can't see the bottom. I mean, that's all I want. So don't misunderstand me. I'm ready to jump. I just want to see the bottom.
Marilee?
Just to throw in 2 cents, the panel discussion that we had on at HSC this morning all addressed the successes that they've had with this. And it has been around the organization of whatever service they were offering. But it was in line with both what Corey and Joe are saying. Simple as much as possible so that we're not turning people away because they're confused or because they're intimidated. So we don't want that to happen. But at the same time, we want the parameters set so that everybody knows where they are and how do we adjust them? How are we flexible with them so that they work? And that was their description of successes this morning revolved around those 2 things.
Yeah, and I hear sort of support across the board from the council here like that. Yes, and hey, some questions about the operating plan. So I want to make sure we all leave the meeting kind of nodding our heads that yeah, there's some questions, but in general we want to go forward.
Yes.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. Mary Bridget, do we need to decide? Was that bye, Aaron, or did you have a question?
Oh, it's a goodbye. Sorry.
Bye.
Have a good night. Our last interview, do we have them? I don't think they're going to.
Yeah, it sounds like they weren't able to reach him. My suggestion would be you're in a work session tonight, so you wouldn't be able to take official action with regard to his application. I would keep him in the pool for your deliberation on March 1st. We'll try and figure out in the meantime if there was some extenuating circumstance or something happened and have more information for you. But, and we'll do that and have more information for you before March.
Perfect. I think that's it for the evening. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to adjourn us. Have a great night.
Good night.